Thank you all for joining us this morning. Brandon and I are here to talk about no-code ways to ditch your legacy, or in the case we're going to be describing it today, vintage IAM infrastructure. And with that, I'd like to just introduce ourselves. Brandon?
Yeah, I'm Brandon McCaffrey. I'm a solution architect representing my company CyberArk today.
And I'm Mark Callahan. I head up product marketing here at Strata, and I just want to tell you that we're all just really glad to be here with you. Now, if you saw the theme for Identiverse this year, it's the digital identity engine. And we wanted to play off of that metaphor a little bit more. And as we looked at that, we were like, you know, what would really fit well as we were telling a story about legacy IAM infrastructure, and we started thinking about cars. And so hopefully there's a few gearheads in the audience, because we are going to go down a little bit of a path of cars, a little bit of copy cars and identity, if you will. And so as we think about the topics that we're going to cover today, we're going to lead off with what are those challenges of your legacy IAM infrastructure. And in today's scenario, we're actually going to be talking about this as your vintage infrastructure, and you'll see why in just a moment. Next, we're going to talk about electrifying your legacy infrastructure, and what can you do that's this no-code approach to bringing it into a modern environment. Then we're actually going to do a live demo. So we are going to throw caution to the wind, and we actually are going to pray that the conference Wi-Fi works, but we are going to do a live demo for y'all. And then we're going to open up for Q&A. So feel free to bring up questions throughout, but know there's going to be time at the end that we like to field those. And so without further ado, that promised metaphor. So as we think about the digital identity engine, I'm curious if anyone in the audience has an idea. First of all, does anyone know what the top car is, out of curiosity? That's a Chevelle. It is 1971 Chevelle SS 454. And as you look at these two cars, and then the one down below here is a current era Tesla Model S Plaid. Well, as you look at these two cars, and you're like, what the heck do these have to do with identity? I want to tell you a little bit about how fast these two cars go. So in 1971, that Chevelle could do 0 to 60 in 6.1 seconds. That was mind-numbingly fast. As you think about the other cars of the era, you're thinking about four-door family haulers, like the big three. They weren't even making cars for sport purposes. They weren't looking for these high-performance cars. And they started dropping these monster engines into them to create these vehicles. And so as you think about it, 6.1 seconds, 0 to 60 was the top of performance, the top of everything at the time in 1971. Well, times change. And I actually have a Ford truck that can beat that by a second and a half right now that weighs 2,000 pounds more than that Chevelle does. And so as we think about what's changed now, that Tesla Model S can do 0 to 60 in under 2 seconds. And if you think about what's changed in 50 years, that's impressive. The technology has changed, the way that they build cars, the fact that the top vehicle is an internal combustion engine, and we're looking at electric vehicles now. In fact, any guesses on how many cars can do 0 to 60, production vehicles can do 0 to 60 in under 3 seconds that are currently available off the shelf? There's 25 production vehicles who can sprint 0 to 60 in under 3 seconds. And the metaphor here is very much one of, as you look at those two cars, though, is there one that you might want to have more in your garage? That's what I thought, right? As you look at these, that Chevelle is dang gorgeous. That's something you want to hang on to, and you want to keep driving it. You're not going to get rid of it because there's a Model S out there that can smoke you. There's just so much more that you've put into that Chevelle that you want to keep, and you want to keep it running, but you want to do so in a way that brings it more modern. You want to increase the performance of it. You want to make it more secure. You want to make it safer, but how do you do that? And so that's what we're going to be talking about today, is how do you manage that as we think about your IAM infrastructure in a way that doesn't require you to just tear the entire vehicle apart and build it back up. We're going to talk about a way that you can do it in just a few minutes. So without further ado, we're going to start off with some of the challenges that are often associated with, we're calling it vintage IAM infrastructure. So lack of security is the first place I want to start. Now, looking at this picture here, can anyone tell me what's missing in terms of like safety, security, anything from a modern vehicle? It's seatbelt. There's no three-point seatbelt. There's no airbag in this thing, right? There's analog gauges. There's no distance monitoring. There's nothing that's going to help you drive this vehicle. You have to drive the vehicle. In fact, it wasn't many years before this that seatbelts were even an option. Like, you actually had to ask for it from the factory to get seatbelts in your vehicle. And the same holds true for your legacy IDPs, your legacy applications, and also the business decisions that were made 15, 20 years ago as you were building out your current environment. Times have changed, but at the time, those were really good decisions. Those were really good products. They were the best of breed at the time, But times have changed. And so all of a sudden, you're starting to see these gaps as your infrastructure is starting to age. And that security problem is one that you got to really address. And so, Brandon, we were talking about this before, the lack of security.
Yeah, just in terms of some examples, I'll leave the car analogies to Mark because he's clearly the best at it. But customers I've spoken with, when they've had some of these legacy IDPs, there's different MFA capabilities that won't be baked in there from a compliance standpoint, like phishing-resistant MFA, for example. Not being kind of baked into that is challenging when you want to go expand that to the rest of your organization. Same deal with multi-factor authentication. I still speak to a lot of enterprises that are on things like Symantec or other technologies that were amazing at their time, but now as you start trying to plug all the holes in your infrastructure, it can be really challenging with those that kind of tooling, right, for a modern security practice. So not as evident as missing seatbelts maybe, but still the same concept.
Exactly.
For some of these technologies.
Exactly. And again, we're not here to cachet it, that those legacy things. Those truly were best of breed and the highest performing systems at the time. It's again, just things have changed. And as the changes continue, you've also got to deal with the costly upkeep and maintenance. And so this is actually the motor from that particular Chevelle that I had a photo of. And all you can see here is Chrome, and it's absolutely gorgeous. And first of all, if any of y'all have messed with Chrome, you know how hard it is to keep it looking like this. That's the first thing I'll tell you, is that took probably 6 hours, if not a full day, to get it that shiny. But what you don't see is the duct tape and baling wire that's underneath the motor that's keeping it running. You've got a 1971 internal combustion engine car. Where do you get parts? You don't get parts. You get donor vehicles. You go to junkyards. You're pulling things out. You go to aftermarket builders who are giving you parts. You're struggling to keep this thing running. You keep it afloat, but it's really fragile, and you don't want to touch it. And that's a lot of the things that we hear when we're talking to customers is they have this legacy infrastructure, duct tape, bubble gum. I mean, it looks great, it's working, but oh gosh, stand back, don't touch it, because Jim, who actually built it, left 7 years ago, and if something happens, we're hosed, And so as we think about that, the upkeep and the maintenance.
Yeah, I love it. I have, you all might have some colleagues, maybe even yourself, where you've really extended that IAM system to the limits, right? I've had a colleague that built his own custom, it was really cool. It pulled data from an HR system, pushed it into the IAM system, and he built that all himself because his IAM system didn't support it. So it was really awesome. But then when he left, it was kind of like job security for him, right? It was there's a problem. Let me call up Chad to help solve it. So those systems can, you can do some really great customization to these systems, but over time, as new people join the organization, that becomes really challenging to maintain, right? Especially without proper documentation and everything. So that's where something a little bit more modern can be helpful there.
Yeah, and that skills gap is really readily apparent. If any of y'all have an older or vintage car, there's a little prayer that you say when you go out to drive it. You're hoping it doesn't break down while you're out there, because you don't want to be that person on the side of the road with the hood up, but it happens to the best of us. But nevertheless, that happens with a lot of IAM infrastructure too. When it's really duct taped together, there's a hands-off approach. It's like, don't touch the thing, it's working, but we don't know how, and just pray that it keeps going. And hope is not a strategy. We need to look beyond that. And so then we start thinking about the UX. So as we think about a really seamless experience, you've deployed a cloud IDP, you've got single sign-on, everything's so smooth for some of your apps, but not all of your apps. Those non-standard legacy applications, the ones that don't speak modern standards like OIDC or SAML, have a very different login flow. They have a very different login experience. You're still maintaining servers, you're doing things, you may be maintaining legacy licenses to keep those things running. People are using usernames and passwords to get in, and you have this really disjointed experience. So while your users start the day getting into a Tesla Model S with just one screen and not even a steering wheel, it's got a yoke now, then they go to those other applications, those legacy non-standard applications, and they've got this, and they're like, kind of, what do I do with this? You pull out the Post-it note with a username and password, and you log in that way. So it becomes a really disjointed UX as you think about legacy or vintage infrastructure.
Yeah, and I was working with an airplane manufacturer, and I know there's a ton of those, right? But they actually saw their competition as these modern space companies, right? And so for their customers, as they saw it, the employees, they wanted that experience to be beautiful from an onboarding perspective. And they wanted that to apply to kind of all of their applications, the day-to-day experience of that user. So they were thinking about this modernization project from a usability, UI, making something beautiful for their employees, which I thought was really cool. And definitely, I think many of you might be thinking along the same line as you adopt these projects of how is this going to look to my end users. I want this to be elegant.
And not saying this isn't beautiful. To a lot of us, that's actually a beautiful interface. But nevertheless, it's very different than the one that they expect as they log into their system. And so the next thing you think about with your vintage IAM infrastructure is how much visibility do you actually have into what's happening with the applications, with your users, and that. So first of all, the passenger mirror on a 1971 Chevelle was an option. So you started with your driver's side rear mirror, but the other one was an option. And so that 2-inch by 3-inch piece of chrome, how much do you think you can actually see what's going on in your environment and what's behind you? And that's actually the same thing that's happening when you've got legacy IDPs and legacy applications. There's all these dark corners where you don't know what's happening. And I think that's like probably one of the worst nightmares for all of us is we don't know what we don't know. And those are the things that can really bite you. And so that visibility comes up, especially during compliance considerations.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I like to think of like the new cars that have that safety feature where like you go to pull in a lane and they'll be like, no, there's a car there. Like maybe don't do that. That's why I failed my driver's test the first time, just FYI. I was like, you got to check over your shoulder, Brandon, before you turn. Right. So I've learned that lesson, but the cars really help you these days in terms of understanding and keeping you safe, right? And that's what some of these modern systems should be doing for us, is not just getting us from point A to point B, but making sure we're getting there safely, right? Making sure our identity security infrastructure is actually proactively helping us be protected and give us that kind of visibility and seamless experience that we're looking for.
Cool. And little spoiler here is that we're actually going to give that visibility to the Chevelle just the same way we're going to do it to legacy infrastructure. So if you're wondering where we're going with this, there's a point to this. We're actually going to be electrifying or modernizing this vintage vehicle, just like we're going to be able to do with your IAM infrastructure. So the last challenge, as we think about this, is the lack of innovation. There is a huge opportunity cost of supporting legacy IAM infrastructure, whether it's a legacy IDP that you're paying 5 FTEs to keep whatever particular WAM environment up and running, all the servers, all the licenses. Those things have all been end of life, so you're paying these exorbitant support fees to keep that running for a small subset of applications, and that just isn't where you should be. But as you think about it, identity tech debt is one of the biggest challenges that faces all of us. And I actually want to crib a quote that I heard Nat Krishnan from Gartner used a couple of months ago. And he said that a failure to address your legacy IAM tech debt means that the majority of the work that your IAM teams are doing will be unplanned. And that hurts. That's painful, but it's true. As you think about your backlog, think about the revenue generating things on that backlog that your developers could be working on that's actually supporting the company's strategy going forward, and how much of it is just cleaning up cruft and leftover things that are legacy issues, things that predated you, predated your team. How do you get past that? And so you can see here, the Chevelle is actually stuck in park, so that was a very appropriate picture, but that's actually what happens to your organization too, as we're thinking about legacy IAM infrastructure.
Yeah, and we had a customer in Brazil that I thought their business was really cool. They protected the streaming rights for musicians, basically help get them paid. It's kind of cool. And when they were able to kind of speed up their development cost, or development process by 90% is what they tracked it, with modern identity security infrastructure, like with CyberArk. And that's because of the ability to now standardize on things like OpenID Connect, so you can run really fast. You have documentation, you have these standards to now build off of. Those are some of the cool projects you can undertake. And now the next thing they want to do is build out a seamless authentication experience for all the musicians and their agencies to sign into. So I thought that was really cool. They couldn't do it until they got this identity security infrastructure in place, and now they're the world is their oyster.
That's it. I mean, just out of curiosity in the audience here, like as you think about legacy IAM tech debt, is that a challenge? And you don't have to out yourself, but I'll raise my own hand. I know it's a huge problem, for organizations. Is that a challenge for your own organization? Custom applications, non-standard applications. You lost the people who coded the application. You don't have access to the source code. How are you? You don't have a Chilton's guide. I know that's only going to resonate with a few of y'all, but like as you think about there's a shop book for every single car out there in the world, and it's kind of your Bible as you're able to decipher how to fix your Chevelle. But you don't have the Chilton's guide to your applications, and so you're stuck. Again, it's sort of this hands-off approach. You are doing risk acceptance out the wazoo because you just don't want to touch it. You don't want to bother the app owner team. And you're just like, how do I do this? How do I make good with all of this? And so this takes us to kind of the pivotal moment in our conversation. So this is, what do we do? Do we just walk away from the shell? Do we just say we're not going to use the thing? Or do we figure out a way that we can actually modernize it and do it in a way that it still keeps it heart and soul? Do we do it in a way that's actually easy, that doesn't tear apart the entire vehicle, that we can make this more secure and more modern? And so this is where we're going to get to the idea of an electric crate motor. And so up here I've got 4 different vehicles that are all over 40 years old, that all have had an electric motor dropped into them in the engine bay. So what happened is they ripped out the engine and the internal combustion engine, and they've actually electrified these vehicles, whether it's a single motor or wheels at, motor at each of the wheels. There's a way to do this. And the idea of a crate motor, if you're not familiar with it, manufacturers will actually build on the assembly line a number of engines that are only meant to go in other people's vehicles. They don't actually get dropped into a car on the production line. They become, for all intents and purposes, a crate motor. It comes in a box to your house that's meant to be put into another vehicle. And that's the conversation we're having today. As we look at this, things have changed, but you don't want to get rid of that vintage infrastructure. So what do we do? How do we bring it to a modern place? And how do we do it easily without teaching your kids curse words and bloodying up your knuckles and spending the entire weekend in the garage to get one seized bolt undone? That's not the work you should be doing. You should be focusing on revenue generation projects, and you should be able to focus on the really hard problems.
Yeah, so brings us to CyberArk here, where we see ourselves in this equation as that electric engine, being kind of the new mousetrap, the better mousetrap, if you will, for an identity security platform. So being able to do your historical kind of, SSO, MFA, all that good stuff, right? But extend that as a superpower to things like your SQL databases, your Windows servers, your Linux servers, and have kind of one unified authentication experience that is all tracked with our ITDR platform. So you now get intelligence built on top of all of that. So that's the concept of us being the electric engine. Thank you for that.
Oh, yes.
And you can see at the center the identity security intelligence, right? So that's what we're really excited about, kind of the next generation of identity security platforms, really, is going to be having that intelligence in the center, being able to look at basically every login to every resource that you can imagine, your endpoints, your servers, your databases, your web applications, and being able to then correlate all of that to give you the right level of intelligent privilege controls when you need it at that time inside the sessions of those applications. So this is what we're really excited about bringing to kind of all of our customers at CyberArk, or anyone interested in becoming a customer, is that kind of modernity of the electric engine, if you will.
And so as we think about that crate motor, those images that I showed with the 4 different vintage vehicles that all had an electric motor dropped into it, those orange wires, those were the high voltage wires that go out to the battery, but they're also the wires that become sort of the wiring harness. And if you know about cars, the wiring harness is like the linchpin to everything. It's the piece that makes all the systems work together. It's the thing that makes sure that your driving lights, your brake lights are working, and make sure the electric door locks, there weren't electric locks on those vehicles, but it makes all the things work together. And so as we think about this, all that goodness that CyberArk Identity is bringing to the table, you need that wiring harness to make it work with those non-standard applications. And that's what we're actually going to demo, is how do we do that? And so the way that you do that is through a software approach to things called identity orchestration. And the benefit of identity orchestration is that you get this unified identity fabric. So you take all of your existing legacy infrastructure, you take all the services you've built up over many, many years, the new ones that you've added recently, the ones you want to continue to add, and you build them into this composable and flexible fabric that allows you to add new services or subtract services very easily, but you want to stay very flexible and dynamic. And the benefit of this, and this is the biggest benefit, and I'm burying the lead in what we discussed at the beginning, is that this is a no-code approach to adding those services to legacy applications. You do not have to touch the source code. Jim's gone, whoever's gone, that you don't have the Chilton's guide, it doesn't matter, because this approach means that as you're trying to add modern authentication services, everything that we're talking about with Brandon and CyberArk on, to those legacy applications, you can do so, and the app doesn't know that anything at all has changed. It still thinks that it's getting SiteMinder headers if SiteMinder was protecting it prior. And you don't have to touch the source code. That's the really critical thing here. And it allows you, again, to really add and subtract and make all of your services, this is the hardest part, your multi-generational identity services work as one. And so how do we do this? Okay, so we've gotten in just about 20 minutes. And so this is the blueprint, and then we're going to jump to a demo right after this slide. But this is the blueprint for our Restro Mod work that we're going to do today. And so I talked about identity orchestration being that wiring harness that makes all of this work together. The flow that you see here is a typical flow that you'd have for a legacy or non-standard application, custom app that's protected by SiteMinder. And it's SiteMinder uses headers as it delivers authorization or authentication requests. And so as you think about that, this application over on the right-hand side or stack of applications, they're all expecting headers still. And what we're actually going to do is through identity orchestration, we're actually going to put something called an orchestrator in that process, in that flow, that actually is going to act as a translator so that it actually can take all the information that we need from CyberArk identity and from the single sign-on workflow, translate that into a SiteMinder-like header so that the application gets everything that it needs. And in the process, you can actually turn off SiteMinder. You can turn off that legacy IAM. You can actually move off that legacy infrastructure. And the best part is you aren't rewriting that application. We've talked to many, many customers that talk about how long it takes. And we talked to Gartner about how long it takes to refactor an application. And it can run anywhere from a month to a year. And on average, about $150,000, though we've heard up to $2 million an app. Now imagine your company has 30 legacy applications that you have to rewrite, or 300. How do you do this at scale? And that's what we're going to do. We're going to talk about how you do this at scale, and you do it in a way where you didn't have to touch the applications. So this being Vegas, Brandon and I actually, in the land of high rollers, we actually brought our own driver today. This is actually kind of a nice thing. Yeah, the casino actually gives you a chauffeur if you spend enough money. And so, and he's even got driving gloves. So as we are getting into this, we wanted to walk you through a live demo. And so the best part about this, and the case is always in identity demos, they're like blink and you miss it. It's like the best demos. It looks like nothing happened. We're also going to show you how we configured it. But what we're going to do is start to finish, we're going to take an application that was previously protected by SiteMinder, hard-coded to SiteMinder, and we're actually going to protect it with CyberArk identity. And we're going to do it in about 2 minutes. The application is not going to have anything changed. It's not going to know the world around it has changed. And that whole fear of like, don't breathe on it because it'll break, you don't have to worry about it. It's just going to be that easy. And so as we get into this, I'm going to let our driver change the screen here and drive us through this. The driving gloves were unexpected, by the way. That was kind of a nice touch to the prop situation here. So what we're doing here is we're actually logging into that application that was previously protected by SiteMinder. We've turned off that agent, and what we're doing now is it's actually protected by CyberArk identity. And so he's, driver, would you please enact the passwordless flow? Thank you. And in doing this, the application that we're accessing here was actually a very sensitive one to us. It's an internal banking app, and so we've actually put up some additional controls upon this that CyberArk enables. So we've done multiple steps to ensure the security of this particular application. But the thing that's so critical in all this is that we're not changing the source code one iota on this legacy app. We couldn't if we wanted to. We don't even know what it looks like. What we're doing is actually doing this all through identity orchestration. And so the driver's actually walking us through the process here. And again, live demos. This shows our confidence in conference Wi-Fi. Conference Wi-Fi.
Conference Wi-Fi is a joy. Authentication succeeded. Come to me.
Almost.
Live demos. Let's try to put password.
Perfect. Now, Brandon and I were having a conversation just before this meeting also about the number of customers together that we have both heard that have made sunsetting decisions about legacy applications simply because they didn't speak modern identity protocols. Killing an app for identity purposes is bad, okay? That's bad. You don't want to do that. That's not the decision process that should be made here. You should make it for business reasons, but not because you can't figure out how to protect it or bring it current or make it protected by modern authentication. For your cybersecurity or cyber insurance mandates.
The Wi-Fi is confuzzled.
Ruh-roh.
Let's show how we built this.
There we go. We'll come back to this in a moment. There you go. We shift gears. So as we think about this, there's really only two steps involved. There was work that we did, and we're not trying to do this in a sales pitch way. We're doing this simply, these are the tools that we use, just so you understand. There was configuration changes that we did on the CyberArk side, on the workforce identity dashboard. We basically added a new web app. And what we're doing here is telling CyberArk to trust the Mavericks identity platform, which is on Strata's side. And it's just basically a metadata exchange between the two. So there was configuration changes that we did on the CyberArk side. Took 3 minutes. And then we went over to the Mavericks side.
And this will allow you to not only add in a web application per like a template, right, where we have like thousands of templates here, but it'll allow you to also put multi-factor authentication specifically for this app as you'd like it, supporting modern things like passkeys, FIDO, etc. And if you'd like, you can see that little secure web sessions tab. You can actually turn on session monitoring, so we can record everything that happens inside the session. If the user takes a specific action, like wants to reset their password or something, we can actually prompt MFA inside the session. So that's some of the modernity that CyberArk is bringing to you on the application control plane. Whereas on the Strata side, I'll let them show how that's set up to speak to your on-prem apps.
Back in our metaphor analogy, that 2-inch by 3-inch piece of Chrome for visibility, now you have complete visibility into what's happening with the legacy applications and complete control. So on the Strata side, we talked about identity orchestration. There's 3 steps that you do. So we're not touching the app at all. What we're doing is we're first going to add CyberArk to our identity fabric. Then we're going to do some quick configuration changes on the application side, and then we're going to build a user flow. So the first step that we do is basically a parallel process to what we already did on the CyberArk side, and that was basically just setting up that the metadata exchange between the two so that they know that they can trust one another, and that's now added CyberArk to our identity fabric. Now, an identity fabric takes all the things that you currently have, and it's unique to you. It is all the services, no matter how old they are, that's unique to you, and it makes them all work together. So this is a sort of a custom bespoke way of building to an identity fabric process. You don't buy an identity fabric, you build one. So the next step that we do is we're going to configure the application. So that very sensitive app that we had, that internal bank app, is that we're just going to go over, and all we really need to know here is which URL, the upstream URL that we want to put the orchestrator, that little piece of software in front of, to handle this exchange. And so all we needed was that URL. We can go a little bit further if we wanted to. If there's sensitive pages within there that we wanted to add a little bit finer grained authorization, we can actually set those policies and controls just right here in config. But for the intents of what we're doing right now, we've just added that to the settings here. The last step that we're going to do is we're going to set up a user flow. So this takes your identity fabric that you've created, it takes the application that we've configured, and it takes CyberArk identity, which we added into the fabric, and it makes them work together. And in doing so, really you're just setting up some policies that tell the workflow to go where it needs to go now. So from an authentication perspective, now what we've done is we've set a policy that says requires CyberArk OIDC for the control instead of SiteMinder. So we've turned off the SiteMinder agent. We've enabled the path to the CyberArk OIDC, and that's for all access. Now, we talked about headers, right? So SiteMinder delivers authentication requests with header information. How's that application, that 1971 Chevelle, getting the information it needs and knowing that nothing's changed? We're actually doing a translation here. And all we're doing is, you'll see the header name, some of the attributes over there, SiteMinder user, email, first name, last name. What we're doing is we're just mapping those. And we're telling, this is a one-time config. We're just telling it where to find that in CyberArk identity, so that when the request comes through, we do the translation at the orchestrator level and serve it back to that header-based app as it was expecting. So it's getting everything that it needed in that process. We deploy this, and Bob's your uncle. If conference Wi-Fi was working with us, nevertheless, that's all there is to it. And it's really that simple. I was going to make the promise of no smoke and mirrors and not like a cooking show where the raw cookies go in and you're taking the baked ones out like right away. We had to do a little bit here just because of the Wi-Fi, but nevertheless, that's literally it. It's a 3 to 5 minute process. And we talked about scale, whether you have 300 or 3,000 legacy non-standard apps, this is how you scale. It's not working with a team to try to figure out how to refactor every single one of those applications. And you get off this almost identity treadmill, and some of y'all probably can relate to this as well, is that as you're refactoring applications, you're hard coding it for a single service and a service update or a change or some configuration or requirements that are coming down from from the government as you're making changes. But there's this identity treadmill, and it's almost like by the time you get done refactoring, something else has happened, and you've got to add something else again, and you've got to refactor the application again. It's kind of like the Bay Bridge. If you start the painting team who actually paints the Golden Gate Bridge, as they are actually going to from the city side over to Marin, as they're painting across, getting that nice rust red color, by the time they get over to the Marin side, what happens is it's already rusting on the city side, and they're starting back over, and they're doing this process over and over and over. And what we're talking about here is using identity orchestration to modernize once and stay flexible forever. And you do it through this process of a software-based approach that then allows you to modernize those legacy apps with the protection of CyberArk identity. And so, anything else you wanted to add to?
No, beautifully done.
All right.
I think we can pull this up. Okay.
All right. So, in terms of our conversation today, what we wanted to share was how do you take that vintage infrastructure, that legacy IAM infrastructure that you spent all these years building, and how do you modernize it in a way that it doesn't lose its heart, its soul, all the policies, all the control, the security that you've come to love, but how do you protect it with a modern identity platform like CyberArk's, and how do you do it without tearing it down? And hopefully in this process, what we've done is we've shown how you can take that electric crate motor of sorts along with a wiring harness of identity orchestration, and you can actually modernize those applications. And you can do so very quickly and save a boatload of money and time and effort and focus on the hard problems in the process. So if there was a takeaway, or maybe 4 takeaways that we have today, that refactoring is probably not the best way to modernize identity for your applications. Not saying that you don't need to refactor your apps, but if you're solely doing it for the purposes of identity services, probably not the best use of time, because there's something that you can do very differently at a fraction of the cost and expense that gets you where you need to go much, much faster. You can de-risk your migrations, and as you modernize identity here, we didn't show a big bang cutover. We didn't say that we were changing the source code, hitting deploy, keeping our fingers crossed, and staying up all weekend hoping that things don't go bad. What we did is we did some simple configuration changes. If a customer needs to roll back, it's a very easy rollback process because everything's happening in the configuration layer. And you can do this in a phased approach, app by app, team by team, however you want to do it. You can even support concurrent IDPs as we think about IDP flexibility and IDP continuity. That's a pretty key thing that we'd like to talk with you about if you're interested at the booth. Talking about that it's essential as you're adding security services to your legacy apps, whether cybersecurity mandates are requiring it, government compliance is requiring it, that time is coming. Like, risk acceptance is not the answer. Kicking the can down the road is only going to get you so far. It's going to expose yourself to more risk. You're going to have issues that are going to keep coming up. It's time to address that. And if you can do it in a much faster way, I think that seems like a pretty awesome approach. And finally is that idea that using identity orchestration, those orange wires, that wiring harness, modernize once and stay flexible forever. We talked about all the additional services that CyberArk Identity brings to the table. You start with that migration of moving from legacy WAM over to CyberArk Identity, but there's all these different post-auth or advanced identity services that you can just as easily add because it's already in the process. It's all part of the fabric, and it makes it much, much easier for your teams to focus on what matters most. And so, Brandon, anything else that you have?
Yeah, just to give some final examples, maybe put a fine grain point on this. We've been working with a lot of customers that have like Oracle EBS, their kind of Oracle infrastructure that's still self-hosted. Same with any apps that are built on like an IBM mainframe. They can be great apps, right? They're wonderful apps. They just need some modern love from an authentication and security perspective. And then lastly, anything like that's Java-based that was like written in Java. There's obviously a lot more we can cover, but I just want to give a couple examples to get the wheels spinning for anyone here that might have applications like that and might want to think about modernizing them. But yeah, with that, I think there's
happy to open up to any questions.
Would love a couple.
And we also are at the expo space. So if you don't have your question answered here, please come down and visit us. Our booths are actually right next to each other. But yes, question?
So you mentioned that you moved away from, the example you moved away from SiteMinder agent to a proxy-based solution. This proxy, where was it hosted, and was it catering to multiple applications at the same time? Because SL agent was very application specific.
Yeah, so the question was examples of moving away from, was it Oracle Access Manager or CA SiteMinder? SiteMinder. SiteMinder, was the agent specific to each application, or was it able to be deployed?
SiteMinder, I know that it is, the agent is specific to
Yeah, the new approach, that you're asking for.
I might actually grab our mechanic here. Like any good show, you're going to bring your mechanic with you.
Yeah, I'll let Terry
This is
answer that one.
Vegas, dealer's choice. You can replace the agent one for one with an orchestrator if you like that model, or you can put them centralized and have that centralized bank do many applications. It's up to you. We can deploy in either model.
Oh, good question.
Yeah, thank
by
you.
the way.
Any other questions? Hopefully, oh, yes.
Does it have anything to integrate with sort of a non-web-based legacy? So we've got desktop client for a legacy app that is just LDAPing in. There's not a web build to get to the desktop client that's connecting into the service. Is there an integration that works with that, or is this strictly for someone who's going to
Yeah, I was going to say, do you want to take that or Terry again?
Mileage will vary based on thick clients. The limitation in many thick clients is you just can't change the user experience, and none of us can change that reality. But we always say, let's talk about the application. We'll be the first to tell you if we can't, but sometimes we can.
Yeah, CyberArk does have a cool endpoint that you can install on like your server or your Windows desktop that can actually sit in front of the executable and prompt for authentication in front of it. So if you want MFA to thick clients, it's maybe something we could talk about specifically.
Anything else? Well, with
Any
that,
other
yeah, I was going to
questions?
say, and please do come by. We CyberArk and Strata have booths right next to each other down in the expo floor. We really appreciate you all spent your time with us, the 40 minutes that you gave us this morning, and we'd love to workshop with you. If there's any specific things that we didn't address, please come see us. And we also have lots of great swag, so come down and say hi. And if you want to talk cars, we'd also do that. So without further ado,
Mark
Brandon,
more
thank
so
you.
than me. But yeah. Thanks, everyone.
Without further ado, thank you.